I love this passage. Now, I may have a special affinity for this passage because I have a brother, and I'm sure things like this happened in my own childhood, where my dad came to the two of us and said, will you go do this? And individually we would say, one of us would say, I will not. And the other said, yes, I will. And then it probably played out much in the same way. I don't know if that's the affinity I have. Maybe it's because it connects so closely with where we are. And the whole point of the message and this is not to say that we're Christian, but to truly be Christian. You know, the older brother, the one who said, I'll be there, and then didn't go, was not pleasing. It's like people who show up at church and say, amen, yes, we should act like Jesus. And then out the door, and the thought has gone out of the head. And then there are people out in the world who more or less hear that calling culturally, however they get it, and they then sort of decide to act that way. They've said, no, I won't, but then they decide to do it. So my question as I thought about this passage and as I planned it months ago to talk about it is, who are we? Who are you? And then this week as I was really chewing on it, I kept thinking that question, who are you? Who are you? Which led me to the rock and roll band, The Who. The Who?
Yes.
The Who. Yeah. They have a 1978 song called Who Are You? Pete Townsend, the lead guitarist and creative force behind the band, wrote the song. And beyond that, this is where it gets murky, because rock stars aren't known for their consistency in the way that they remember things or the way they tell the same story over the years. One version has him inspired by his frustration as a newly successful rock star. And according to that story, Townsend was in a meeting with record executives, a long meeting discussing royalties, and he left the meeting with this large check, and he felt like a sellout. Being a rock star, he went to a bar and found himself passed out in a doorway. A nice police officer came along and recognized him and told him, you can go sleep at home tonight instead of a jail cell if you can get up and walk away, which is a line from the song, to which Townsend responded, who are you? Rock stars, like I said, aren't known for their consistency, and in a 1985 interview, Townsend recounted that this song is the prayer of a destitute man. Now, I'm not going to sing it, but I do want to share with you the first few lines. I woke up in a Soho doorway. A policeman knew my name. He said, you can go sleep at home tonight if you can get up and walk away. I staggered back to the underground and a breeze blew back my hair. I remember throwing punches around and preaching from my chair. And the chorus then goes, who are you? Who are you? I use this song to introduce the struggle that each one of us has with our identity. We all have a given name. Very few of us have any control over that unless at some point later in life you went to court and decided to have your name changed. But we have this name that we were born with. It identifies us as a part of a family. And so when we hear our name or somebody else uses our name, they connect it with this identity, this person, this family. We have our upbringing, the kind of background that makes us who we are. For many of us, our job also adds to our identity. Maybe our hobbies or interests. People ascribe things to us about those interests. We also, as a part of our identity, the who we are, have our relationships, our family relationships, the people that we surround ourselves with, our friends. For me, I'm a husband, I'm a father, an uncle. You guys don't see me in the uncle role very much, but I have some nieces and nephews, and I like to, mess with them because I'm a good uncle. I'm a friend. I'll say more about that in a second. I'm also a pastor. But we who are here, mean, you guys who came into this room today, the people who tune in on YouTube to watch this, the people at the later service who will be listening on the radio, we have come together more or less because we identify as Christian. And we can say we're followers of Christ, but this is where we meet the trouble in this story. A great biblical story always brings in some dissonance, just like any good jazz tune would do. But this is where we have the trouble. We have the two brothers, the sons. And the father says, go work for me. One says, okay, and then walks away. We don't know exactly how it may have played out. Maybe he headed toward the vineyard. The old man's not looking anymore. Headed to go hang out with my friends. The other one said, forget it. Yeah, who knows what the story, you picture these conversations in your own life. Go mow the lawn. I've mowed it so many times. This is not confession, but it is an experience. I've mowed it plenty of times. Get Rob to do it. That's my older brother. And then something happens. Maybe I realize Dad's cleaning the eavesdrops. And Dad's got only so much time to do the chores around the house. Might as well mow the lawn. You don't want any guff about it. You don't want any, well, thank you for changing your mind. You just want to go ahead and get the job done and have it be done. But I know deep down inside that when that happened in my own teenage years, my dad was pretty pleased. Ideally, both brothers would say yes and then go do the work. Ideally, Christians would show up and say, we confess Christ and then go live the life. We would talk the talk and then walk the walk. But that's not the story we have in the gospel. And you know what? That's not the real world that we have either. This past week I was with a childhood friend. It was not a part of the week as a Guthrie scholar down in Columbia Seminary. My friend just lives in Atlanta, so we had a couple of occasions to get together and go out to dinner. I went over to his house and spent some time with him and his wife and their child, who's about the same age as Eddie, my younger son. But his name is Inho Lee, and he is the 6th child in the Lee family. And when I was little, I mean really little, way too young to be wandering out of my parents' yard unaccompanied. But this was back in the 70s when even in Detroit people did that sort of thing. I walked door to door, apparently, because I don't remember this at all, knocked and said, do you have any kids inside my age that might be able to come out and play with me? And I got 2 houses up the street before I got to the Lee's house. Jackpot, there were 8 of them. But one of his older sisters answered and said, Inho, I think you have a new friend. And that's how I met Inho. And so I don't remember a time when he and I weren't friends. And so he was the best man in my wedding. Inho and I have been close all this time. So one day we were in my room playing together, and I don't remember this very well. I don't remember it at all, in fact. But we were playing together, and I noticed that I had a very special $2 bill, and it was missing. And so I started looking around my room for it, and a little while later, he went home, and my parents helped me. We looked all through my room. We kind of tore up the house looking for it. And the next day, Inho came over. We were going to go on to the park to play, and so he was just going to knock on the door, and we were going to go. And my parents said, come on in the house for a second. And they had him sit down at the kitchen table, and they said, we just wonder if you know anything about Matthew's missing $2 bill. I said, no. And that was the end of it. Now it's been probably 35 years since then. Inho was telling me this past week when we were together about a time a few years ago when he was telling his son about being honest and telling the truth and doing the right thing. And he was telling him about this experience that has stuck with him all these years. It really made an impression on him. He said, when I was a child, I was over at Mr. Tennant's house. That's how Michael, his son, knows me, is Mr. Tennant. I was at Mr. Tennant's house and we were playing. And Mr. Tennant had this really nice, crisp $2 bill. And he said, I wanted it. He said, so I took it and I put it in my pocket. And he didn't see me take it. And he said, he told his son about how he denied it. And you know, he always felt bad about it. It just really stayed with him all these years. His son said, well, Dad, why don't you just give him the $2 back and say you're sorry? You know, if that's the honest thing to do. Told me that the way my parents handled that, his undeceived, shaped the way he sees Christians to this day. He's not a Christian. He didn't grow up in a Christian home. He grew up in a home that taught the difference between right and wrong, telling the truth and not telling the truth, between stealing and getting things that are rightfully yours. So Inho's son just said, why don't you just give him his money back and say you're sorry? So fast forward to this past week, and Inho's telling me this story about this $2 bill, and he's kind of shifting and awkward, and I had no memory of it actually. And then he pulls out an envelope and hands me a $2 bill.
Wow.
He said, I'm sorry, I took your $2 bill. You know, he's like the younger son in this story. Who are you? Who am I? Who are we? Do we have the conviction to do what is right? Or is it just a bit easier to say, I'll do what's right? I would venture to say that at some point or another in every one of our lives, we've done both. At every point in our lives, at some point in our lives, each one of us has been the older or the younger brother. And the point of this passage is not to say that we're Christian, it's to actually be Christian. In our reading from Philippians, we're called to imitate Christ's humility. And for us, to be united in Christ Jesus. We're called to genuine faith, not just lip service. Is our faith evident by our words, or is it evident by our deeds? We need to be able to confess Jesus. We need to be able to say that we believe. We need to be able to honestly proclaim Christ. But Jesus also should be evident in the way we live our lives. When we are truly honest with ourselves, we can find that sometimes we're like the child in hell who took my $2 bill. And that's a bit like the chief priests and the elders, the scribes, the people Jesus was talking to in this passage. Essentially super church people who all said they would follow God, but then didn't do it. And sometimes we can be like the grown-up in him who actually does what he says he believes. And in this case, it's telling the truth and saying you're sorry. According to Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, we need to make a decision and we need to live it out. It needs to be reflected in our lives. I invite you to do that. Reflect Jesus